Hey everyone, and welcome back to Ontario Cryptids. For the last 2 weeks, I've been cramming in to pre-schedule my episodes in advance since I will be off on vacation next week for 2 weeks. Believe me, it's been 9 years since I've left Canada, so this is well overdue. I'm starting to get excited, but I have a lot to do in the upcoming week. Today we have a special submission from one of our own OC community members, Brandi. Brandi has submitted 2 encounters for you all today. If you have an encounter story that you would like to share, then please forward your stories to OntarioCryptids@gmail.com. I would be honored to share your story with like-minded people. Before we get started, you might hear the air conditioner kick in from time to time. I'm going to apologize for that up front. We have had a bit of a warm spell lately. Now sit back and relax as we begin with today's encounters. The year is 2002. We're headed to Montgomery County, Ohio, the nearest city of Dayton. Hi, I'm a female who hails from South Dayton, Ohio, in a place called Kettering. In 2002, I was living in a rental house on a dead-end street that was owned by my aunt and uncle. This was the first time that I've ever lived on my own after moving out of the house that I grew up in, along with my father and stepmother. I was 20 years old, and this was the first taste of complete freedom that I've experienced. I also had a roommate that I will call Jennifer because that's not her real name. Jennifer was either 25 or 26, I forget which, and the daughter of a friend of my aunt's. Jennifer needed a place to live, and I needed a roommate to help with the cost of the rent and small expenditures, so this pairing worked out well. We each had our own bedroom, our own bathroom, and of course we shared the kitchen, living room, and laundry room. During the week in the evenings, we would sit on the couch together, drink coffee, or eat ice cream and other snacks while watching old TV shows like Golden Girls, Love Boat, and Fantasy Island. Usually this was just a gathering spot for us to talk about what guys we knew and thought were hot while winding down for the evening before going to our bedrooms to crash out for the night. One evening, Jennifer reminded me that it was my turn to take out the trash cans out to the curb for the garbage pickup in the morning. We would alternate every other week taking turns, and we preferred to take out the can or cans in the evenings, since that would be one less thing to worry about in the morning, as then we were both trying to get ready for our jobs, getting caffeinated with our cups of coffee, and then be out the front door. It was dusk with fading sunlight when I began to pull the first garbage can on wheels down the cement driveway. The back of the house was where we kept them, and it wasn't difficult getting the cans down the driveway to the curb for pickup, as the driveway had a slight slope and drop. When garbage can number 1 was in place, I walked up and took hold of the second can, then guided it down and soon had it placed next to the first can. Now, as I remember, it was almost completely dark at this point, and the street lights between our house and the house next door turned on. I walked back up the driveway, and when I was a couple of feet or so from the side door, I raised my head and glanced over across the backyard, which was rather large for our area, and maybe 50 feet from the front of the backyard to the rear. On the other end were more houses, as the road in front of where Jennifer and I lived curved around in almost a semicircle. As I moved my eyes, I first noticed that another streetlight or light pole was on, and that it was casting down light between 2 different homes, although closer to the home nearest me than the other. So both yards were lit up to a degree, but neither were completely lit with how far apart they were spaced, and so there was some darkness between them. I was looking in that direction for just 3 or 4 seconds and ready to go back inside when I saw something silhouetted step out from the darkness and look into the second floor window, which had a light on. The first thought that flashed in my head was that this was a gorilla that escaped from a zoo, but I'd never seen or heard of a gorilla that was that tall and wide. It was shaped more like a man, though, than a gorilla and scaled up as such. Whatever I was looking at, though, just stared in this window like some brazen peeping Tom. It was then that I had placed the palm of my hand over my mouth and then backed up around the house and went inside. I knew this thing didn't see me, but could it smell me? I didn't know. I must have looked like crap because Jennifer asked me if something happened and that I looked as white as a sheet. It took me a minute to compose myself, but I told her what it was that I had seen. It all happened suddenly and only for a few seconds. After I told her what I had seen, she looked shocked and then told me she believed me. Later, I told my dad, my stepmom, uncle, and aunt, but I don't think any of them took me seriously. One day, though, when my dad was visiting, he said, "I do believe there are things out there that we can't explain, and I do think that you saw one of these things." Hearing that from my dad and knowing that he really did believe me was comforting. Her next encounter happens in the summer of 2005. We're still in Montgomery County, Ohio, and we're still in the city of Dayton. What I have to tell you now, I can only describe as going to another Earth in another universe. Nothing else possibly makes sense in light of the things I had witnessed, and now I'll try to articulate and convey just what my experience or travel, if you want to call it that, was. This incident was in the early summer of 2005, and I was living in a house by myself that my dad and stepmother were helping me finance and buy. My dad is by no means wealthy, but anything within reason that I want, he'll help me acquire it provided I do my part and make my payments on time. This house is just to the north of Centerville, Ohio, and has been my home up until just recently. I had moved in that January of the same year and quickly decorated the house to my specific taste, which included pretty pink, white, purple paint for the walls, and my coffee and ladybug related items for my bedroom, kitchen, and living room. I hired a professional painter to come and redo most of my house in March, and before long, the fresh paint was on and the ugly dark colors that the previous owners were living with were a thing of the past. My formerly drab olive green bathroom and bedroom were now a light pink, with the kitchen and living room was transformed into a creamy eggshell white, and the spare bedroom, well, it was painted a deep hue of purple. Living in this house was wonderful but uneventful until towards the end of June. It was at this time I reality jumped, which is one way I describe my experience. I did my usual evening routine of playing some online checkers, watching an old television show rerun or two, having some ice cream, and eventually brushing my teeth and preparing for bed. I crawled into my queen-size bed, which had colorful purple pillowcases and matching sheets, blanket and bedspreads, which matched my colorful disposition and personality. I remember those bed items well because they were a gift my biological mother had given me for my last birthday the year prior. So I went to bed between 10 and 11 p.m. with the door to my bathroom cracked and a small but strong nightlight in case I needed to get up during the night to go pee. I crawled between the sheet and the blanket, pulled the blanket over my body, dropped my head onto my soft pillow, and quickly drifted off to a peaceful sleep. When I awoke in the morning, the first thing I noticed was the bedroom walls were now a noticeably darker shade of pink. And then I saw that the blanket and bedspread covering me were a funky blue and yellow mix, as were the pillowcases under my head. I could not make sense of what I was seeing, and the only thing I could think of was that I thought that I was awake, but in reality, still asleep. I don't know if anything like this has ever happened to you or any of your listeners, but it has happened to me a few different times in my life. I'd wake up in my bed, but then see or notice something in my bed that wasn't quite right, and which told me I was still asleep. As an example, once I thought I was awake and everything in my room seemed normal. That was until I looked at the wall and saw a clock hanging by the AC heat vent. In real life, I had no such clock hanging there or any other wall in my bedroom. I was struck by how real the dream seemed to be, squeezed my forearm, and from which I felt nothing, but then I quickly really awoke in my bed. I checked the wall again. No clocks were there by the vent, and when I squeezed my forearm hard this time, I could feel discomfort. That's when I knew I was really awake and not still dreaming. So I'm awake or mostly awake at this point, but cannot for the life of me understand how the walls and sheet, blanket, bedspread, and pillowcases are now different. While this is going through my mind, I hear a soft meow off on the floor at the end of the bed to the right. I see a small orange cat sitting there. Now, I'm really stunned because while I do not dislike animals, I'm not an animal person and I have never owned a cat in my life. I'm thinking, where did this cat come from and what is it doing in my house? I had no idea and was starting to feel more weirded out than I already was. I don't want to go into trivial details, but over the next few minutes, I did notice some things that were identical as they were before I got into bed. Some that had changed in minuscule ways and others that were more significant, including a second cat, which was fat, gray, wearing a red collar and lounging on a type of plush cat tower in the living room next to a wall. Now, I'm thinking to myself, am I really awake? And none of this makes any sense. There was a coffee maker in the kitchen, though which closely resembled the one I own, but not quite the same exact design. At this time, this wasn't consequential, but was another thing that I was thinking in my noggin, as I found the coffee itself and began making myself a full, strong pot. Coffee is one of the few things that helps me feel better and is capable of calming my nerves. And right at this time, I'd never needed my nerves calmed more in my life. The cats were close to my feet and staring straight up at me. The small orange kitty was very quiet, but the chunky gray one kept meowing at me. Next to the wall and by the kitchen door was a large food bowl which was almost empty and a metal water dish that appeared to be only 1/4 full. I filled the dish with fresh water and found cat food in a bag in the floor cabinet which I used to fill the food bowl all the way up. They turned their attention to the food, and by now I had a cup of strong coffee in my hand which I took into the living room and then quickly seated myself on the couch. In my mind, I was still wondering to myself, what was going on and where was I? This was clearly my home, yet also not entirely the home that I knew. And while the cats were cute, I wouldn't ever have any, but that's a personal decision, so please don't judge me for the choices that I make. I don't wish to offend the animal lovers, but they're just not for me, although I'll happily pet their fluffy heads. The next thing that surprised me was a television because I spend a lot of free time in front of one. Now, we currently have a large flat screen television, but I don't remember them being common and in a majority of the homes in 2005. Also, I personally never saw one at that time or even in this day that was only slightly thicker than an envelope that you'd receive in the mail with the thickest birthday card in it. The kind of cards that have a speaker and play music when you open them. This TV also seemed to be glued to the wall and took up a large portion of it. The thought struck me that I'd absolutely love to have a TV like that, as mine was a huge, heavy block RCA that probably weighed almost as much as I did. I walked up to it and saw that the speakers were very long vertical slits on either side that ran nearly from the top to the bottom, and they were placed on both sides. I looked for a power cord of some type and found none. In the middle of the television towards the bottom, I remember that it said Mitsubishi in silver color and in cursive. On the right-hand lower side was a non-tactical circle which I touched, and the screen promptly powered on 2 or 3 seconds later. It showed a logon with my name and added numerals, and another empty box below with 6 asterisks that prompted the user for a passcode. It let me make 5 separate attempts, all of which failed, and then powered the television off. Nothing I did after that would make the television power up again. In the spare bedroom in my home, I had my desktop computer, so I promptly made my way there and went inside for the first time. My computer was a slow as crap compact, but what I found waiting for me in the bedroom was much different. The computer and monitor were made by a company I've never heard of, and I'm certain it's because this company doesn't exist on our Earth. It said kaleidoscope on both the computer tower and at the bottom of the computer monitor, along with multicolored matching icons, colors that would have made my old hippie biological mom proud to wear if this design was on a shirt. As I remember, the monitor was very thin, much thinner than most monitors we have now, but not as thin as that television in the living room area. I noticed the computer tower did have a large power button, and when I touched it, it booted up. I hadn't noticed until then, but the stealthy orange cat was now in the room with me and off to the side bathing itself. I watched it for a few seconds and turned my head back to look at the monitor. It powered up almost immediately, and to my delight, with no login and/or password screen. The wallpaper was something I most certainly would have used on my old PC if it were available to me. Animated dancing cups of coffee with human, female, and male faces adorning them. I laughed internally and then looked for and located the browser icon. It was called Open Sky, and I soon found that it had its own search engine, which I used to locate pages that were sources of news. Some of the things I found that day totally blew my mind and confirmed that I was not on my own Earth where I belonged. Examples that I read and heard on videos were 1. The U.S. President in 2005 being a man named Charles K. Stewart from a political party that was not Democrat or Republican. 2. Politicians from Finland and Norway arguing over territorial dispute. 3. Sam Kinison and Eddie Murphy promoting a new comedic movie that they were starring in together. 4. A map of the United States where some of the states had the same names while others had different ones I've never heard of. I studied the map for a good long while. I just couldn't get my head around it. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Virginia, and West Virginia were all the same. Ohio was not called Ohio anymore, but Franklin. Indiana was now Jackson, Kentucky was called Jefferson, and Illinois was Davis. North and South Dakota were gone and merged together into just Dakota, along with an area about the size of North Dakota above it, carved out of Saskatchewan and Manitoba, Canada. This new state and its border was now close to what is Regina, Saskatchewan, and very close to Prince Albert. Texas was larger, also now included parts of New Mexico and Louisiana. Now, the most important thing to me that I found on the PC were pictures of me, or rather the me from that Earth. She and I looked very much the same, except she has long hair, well past her shoulders, while I keep mine short. She also has a rose tattoo on the side of her neck. For me, tattoos are like animals. I think they're great for other people, just not for me. I was happy for her. She was living a life that most likely made her very happy, just like the life I lived that makes me happy. We're similar, but we're different, and maybe that's what the universe intended. I don't know and won't pretend that I do. At this point, since the time I had woken up, I was sure I'd been there for just over 4 hours. I got up from the computer chair and went to the bathroom. I wanted a shower and to think on things while there. I do some of my best thinking in the shower, and like the coffee, it helps me clear my mind and focus a bit more. I proceeded to do just that and dry off, and then put my sleep shirt and jammies back on. The orange cat followed me from the other room and watched me intently, Then the chunky gray cat came into the room as well, meowing some more. It was after the gray kitty started meowing that I felt dizzy and disoriented, and it was then that I laid on my back sideways on the bed with my legs hanging off the side. I couldn't focus my thoughts, and I felt my eyes getting heavy, along with also feeling like I was going to puke. The next thing I remember was waking up in the same position with those feelings being completely removed. I didn't feel like I was ready to hop up and run a marathon, but I also didn't feel bad. I quickly noticed that I was back in the safety and comfort of my own home and without any cats or anything else being out of place. I changed clothes, wrote down everything of importance that I could recall from the other Earth in my diary, checked my answering machine and found that I had a call from my dad and the other from a guy friend checking up on me. I decided I'd call them back a little later and did so when the time was right. Before those calls, though, I turned on my TV and computer to make sure that everything was as it should be. George W. Bush was president, no disputes of hostility that I could find happening between Finland and Norway, and no Sam Kinison and Eddie Murphy movie because, sadly, Sam was gone from this particular Earth, and the maps and boundaries were as I'd always known them. I can't say how relieved I was that Ohio was Ohio again and not Franklin. I'd wondered then and since if Ohio on that Earth was named after Benjamin Franklin, and how it would be to wear a shirt emblazoned with Franklin State Buckeye across the front. I would have absolutely loved seeing that Sam Kinison and Eddie Murphy film, though. I hope I never do end up back on that Earth, or any other for that matter. But if I ever do, you can guarantee I'll be finding a copy of it to watch. That's it for me, and if you'd like to use my first name, you may do so. Brandi. Folks, that's going to be it for me today. And a special thanks goes out to Brandi for allowing me to share her encounter story and experience to the rest of the OC community. It's amazing how Brandi has had two totally amazing encounter or experiences that are totally polar opposites. One of them being a Sasquatch peeking into her neighbor's window. God knows what he or she was looking at. I'm guessing it was a he, being a peeping Tom. Just kidding. And then the second, having traveled to a different reality or a different world that mirrors the one that she's living on, but yet not quite. And it would have been super freaky if she actually bumped into her other self, the other Brandi that lives in the other Earth. Anyways, guys, I hope you all enjoy these encounter stories. Again, some of these may vary in length due to the fact that I'm going to be cramming these episodes up in preparation of my vacation. If these stories reminded you of an encounter that you may have had and would like to share, then please forward your stories to OntarioCryptids@gmail.com. I would be honored to share your story on this channel. Thank you all for listening until the end. I truly appreciate it. Please hit the like button on your way out and don't forget to smash that subscribe button if you're new to my channel. Have yourselves a great weekend, and I hope to see you all next week right here on Ontario Cryptids.